All right, so Steve, we have these massive tariffs. We've seen the impact of that in that we've had this massive fall in stocks, $2 trillion written off the US stock market in the first day after Donald
Isn't
Trump.
it fun being a winner? Yeah.
Well, this is all for the good of America. Let's remember that.
That's true.
And then a massive retaliation from China. By the time people are watching this, there might be retaliation from others as well. So the question is, Donald Trump and his followers must be asking, is it worth it? And I spoke to one guy who's in America who I think follows this podcast, a mate of mine called Richard, who's saying that, as far as everyone is concerned in America, it's just business as usual. His followers are still his devoted followers. I wonder how long that's going to last for.
I think there's going to be a bit of chaos coming out of it, because one of the reasons that it's so difficult to do what Trump is trying to do now is that, and you saw his speech, he blamed all the foreign people for coming in and raping. I think I actually used the word raping.
He
raping
did.
And pillaging.
For a man from his background, that's astonishing.
Well,
but that seems to have that's how standards have moved on. We just ignore it now. It's just that's Donald Trump.
I'll grab my cat.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
I'll grab my kitten and talk to you later. The raping and pillaging was done by American companies in the opposite direction. This is the reality. And I know I've bored you with this one too many times, but, my trip to China, 81, 82, 50%, give away half the business, and they agreed. So it was American corporations taking advantage of cheap wages. Now, with China on the other side, a dramatic transformation of the economy over that time, and they have built up that productive capability. That's why they got it. It wasn't because China came across and raped and pillaged American corporations. American corporations came across to China, and if any rape and pillaging occurred, it was in the Rust Belt, where they shut down their factories and moved the productive capability across to China and re-exported back. But that has gone so far, and the level of globalization is just stunning. I mean, I think I've seen studies saying that there are components from more than 100 countries in the iPhone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty difficult to untangle that, isn't it, really? And an enormous amount of paperwork, at the very least, is coming their way.
Yeah. Now, that's all been, with the whole idea of globalization had to go at low tariffs, okay? Because what is actually happening, what we call globalized, is actually more effectively seen as localized or corporatized, because a huge part of international trade now, over 40%, I think, of international trade is transactions inside the one company that spans national boundaries.
But okay, so, and so this is not going to work for that reason. But this is a change in tune from you, because you were quite a supporter of tariffs not so long ago.
Yeah, I'm in favour. The anti-tariff argument says if we don't have tariffs, we specialise in what we're better at, comparative advantage, and that's simple. All it means you have to do is take a sheep dip if you're Australian, and turn it into a blast furnace. Which, we all... You went to that particular lesson in Harry Potter's class of magic, didn't you?
Yeah, but the reality is, as you've just been saying, though, the iPhone is made in all sorts of different places. And it's not made. I mean, there's nothing to stop America saying, well, we're going to make the iPhone entirely in America. They just chose not to because it was cheaper, or there was expertise that existed in countries that they just couldn't find available in America, and presumably.
Both those, the main thing was originally cost. So if we go back to when the globalization began. I mean, I did a study of transnational trade back in the days when I worked in overseas aid, I think in the late 70s, between 77 and 79. And at that stage, a part of what's called the United Nations Commission on Trade and Development, or UNCTAD, tended to be the people who run the UNCTAD came from third world countries, and they had a very strong focus on multinational corporations locating production in multiple countries, and then doing what looked like exports, but they were actually internal transfers inside the company, and they would set up the pricing so that they would take advantage of differences in tax rates and so on to minimise what they paid outside the firm and get as much as possible inside the firm. Now, back at that stage, something of the order of 40% of trade, I think, from memory, was inside international trade. 40% was trade inside companies crossing countries. So it isn't really international, it's intra-corporate. Now, it must be higher these days, and you've also had this whole, particularly with relocating production to China in the first instance, whole lots of subcontractors are also involved. And so the subcontractors sell to the components to the say Vietnamese branch of the American company. I'll choose one. Let's say call it Nike.
Yeah,
and I'm going to guess that it's got about 115 subsidiary factories in Vietnam, each employing 10,000 plus people, which they indeed do. And then so when it sells, that is then sold from Nike Vietnam to Nike America. Now, at the moment, that's going off without any tariffs. Now it's going to face, what's the Nike? I think the tariffs in Vietnam are 90%.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not that. Oh, for coming into they're right. Okay, well, maybe, yeah.
But I mean, like it's half of 90%.
But is that being applied? So I was going to use.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, will it be applied? I mean, because the corporations, a large part of how companies manage to maximise their profits through a globalised system was to use the fact that it was the transactions were not, what do they call it? Hands off, or you weren't independent. So the usual mixture, the usual model that economists build is a company in one country exports to a company in another country, and therefore both companies are going to negotiate for the best possible price. So it's a market transaction. When you've got transfers between IBM America and IBM New South Wales, and I'll use that deliberate reason for using that example, they set whatever price they want because if tax rates are higher in Australia, they'll charge Australia enormous prices for internal operations, and then that transfers a cost. It doesn't turn up as an income source.
And that is Google and all the big tech players. And so if Europe is looking for retaliation, they should be saying, well, we believe, forget the goods. Services are the real issue. You may have a deficit in goods trade, but you've got a massive surplus in services, absolute massive surplus. I mean, 60% of all the world's stock exchange is in America. All the world's stocks, the value of stocks is in America. And a lot of that is the Magnificent Seven. So they are, if we're looking for someone who's raping the rest of the world, it's the US doing it through these tech companies. I don't know why we don't say, okay, we don't believe you're paying your fair share on tech. Let's kick you where it hurts. If this becomes a retaliation, if it becomes a trade war, which it is, why wouldn't we be saying, okay, we don't believe you're paying your fair share. We believe there's transfer pricing, so you're minimizing your tax. So we are going to charge you 20% of all the revenue that you make. So, for example, and we'll do it on subscription. So if someone subscribes to Microsoft Office, we're going to take 20%. We're going to take 20%.
The government, you're saying, not
Microsoft. We'll get that revenue, and we're going to call it a tariff, just as you are. And for every subscription, for every online ad, we'll take that money too. That's our negotiating point. And look, there are more subscribers for these streaming services in Europe than there are in America. So all of them would suffer rather badly if Europe was to say, right, we're going to charge excess fees, and the government would make a lot of money, just as Donald Trump's trying to do. Yeah. So, I don't know why we don't do that. But the other thing as well is, talking about Nike, so some of it comes from Cambodia. Cambodia was actually the place that was leveled with the highest tariff, according to Donald Trump. So,
what about the penguins? Didn't they cop a high rate of tariff?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay,
well, we'll talk.
The penguins are high. You got to watch those little fluffy creatures.
Yeah.
Cute and cuddly boys. Cute and cuddly.
See, that's it. You see, they look cute, then they come over, and you think they're cute, and then the next thing they're taking over your neighbourhood, and they're taking your jobs. That's right. They're there in the restaurants, flipping the fish. Because they're so good at that, and all they want to do is eat the fish. They don't want to be paid as well.
That's right.
Yeah, he's onto them. Yeah.
Pardon the diversion there, but
But Cambodia is an interesting example, because this is a country where, we should talk about how he's arrived at his figures, but I think he's like 47 or 48% tariff, which is halving the tariff, basically, that he said he could apply. And we'll talk about the logistics behind
the formula.
Which is just crazy, because the man clearly lied about what this was all about. But take Cambodia, for example, 49% tariff that he's imposing on them. And the reason that Cambodia's, has this big trade deficit with the United States is because the United States is buying Nike. A lot of Nike clothes are actually made in Cambodia as well, and a lot of knitwear. They're getting a lot of clothes. Now, you could say, well, that's, they're taking away the clothing manufacturing from America, so we've got to put this massive tariff on. The fact is, even at 49%, those clothes are still going to be cheaper made in Cambodia than they are in America. So it's not going to achieve its desired effect. And unless America says, no, we'll start making those clothes here. In which case, to match the price, American workers would have to work at the average salary for Cambodia, which is $500 a year. And the reason Cambodians are not buying American goods is for the same reason, because they earn $500. You have to save a lot of years to buy an American car for that sort of money. So whatever he's trying to do, it will achieve nothing in the case of Cambodia. So you can put a high tariff on. What do you want them to do? Do you want them to suddenly increase their standard of living to such an extent that they can buy American goods, but then it also makes it more expensive for Americans? Or do you just want them to stop sending stuff to America, in which case, what do they do for a living? What's his end game here?
Well, I'm not going to try to do mental diagnostics of Trump here, exclusively. But what he's doing is effectively living in a 19th century world, and 19th century mindset, and imposing it on a 21st century world where transnational production means that companies like Nike are taking advantage of cheap wages in Cambodia and then exporting the goods to sale all over the world, but also America. And now they're going to have a tariff, if they're lucky, only once. This is the real dilemma, is that there are plenty of manufacturing processes where part of the production chain goes from one third world country to America to be shipped to another third world country, back to America, back and again, back. And I think I saw one element of building a transmission system for a car that crossed the American border 5 times. So the companies themselves will face the requirement that they're supposed to record these transactions and pay taxes each time they do, whereas they've been able to ignore those costs in the era of low tariffs. So it's going to cause chaos. But like partly my point about whether you benefit from trade or not, it isn't specialisation that gives you that benefit, it's investment and development over time. And the trouble with trying to relocate that production back to America is that over that 40 years' time, the skill level's risen in countries like Vietnam, Cambodia and China. It's fallen in America. So the capacity to restart that, let alone the wage levels, as you're saying, doesn't exist back in America. So it's one of the many ways in which this ain't going to work, because we're not living in the 19th century world anymore, we're living in the 21st, and that just massively complicates the cost because there's so much transnational trade.
Yeah, it's also quite a handy way, isn't it, of ignoring standards that you might have in your own country and recruitment restrictions. Because I'm pretty sure even in America you couldn't get away with paying someone $500 a year. But you can in Vietnam. So and that's America's fault. So he talks about, America has been raped by these countries. Is Vietnam raping America? Or
I think the Vietnamese might have a different opinion on who raped whom when it comes to America versus Vietnam. Yeah.
I would have thought so, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So I mean, it's Trump's worldview versus the world. Yeah. And I think I'd love to get back and sit back and watch some popcorn, except that we're all going to be starring in this movie. So we've got to work out what the consequences are. Well,
what do you think the consequences will be? I mean, a global recession. I mean, the World Trade Organization and I'm trying to think, various bodies are basically predicting now, aren't they, that this is going to turn us into a global recession. From maybe 2 or 3% growth this year, we're now expecting that we're going to get a -1 or -2%.
Yeah, I think a recession is pretty much guaranteed. Also, what they're doing on government spending is going to have the same impact. I'd be surprised to see a positive number at the end of the year against America's GDP print. But it's going to cause chaos in the globalised system. Now, I've been a critic of that system all the way through, because I saw two sides to it. I saw it, speaking as I was an Australian at the time that I wrote those papers critiquing transnational trade, we were like the host country. We were the first world country that American corporations had operations in, as well as having in America. Then what they do when they decide to take advantage of globalization and cheap wages, they shut down factories in both America and Australia and shift the productive capability to a third world country. We'll use Cambodia this time.
Yeah.
And then what that means is Cambodia gets the investment to build the factory. It gets the wages, even though they're trivial, they still get the wages. And local profit for local Cambodian capitalists as well. America loses the wages, gains in terms of a profit share, which goes to the ultra rich in that country. Australia's loses that all around it. It wasn't getting it was getting the investment, that's gone. It was getting the wages, that's gone. And then it's importing, so its trade balance gets worse as well. So all these factors, when you look at it for host countries, developed countries that don't have transnationals, they were the definite sufferers. But certainly I had to say that depending on how it was handled by the third world country, and here China is the ultimate example, they get the investment, they get the profit, they get the wages. What they didn't normally get was the profit share. Now China worked out how to get hold of the profit share, and that means they can reinvest, and with the reinvestment they've technologically completely leapt past America. So but now if you try unwinding it the way Trump is doing, will that technology go back? America is still obviously a major source of demand for consumer goods, so that'll be a major reason why they would move production back to America. But they haven't been training the workers. They did this sort of the skilled work involved, the machining and so on, for 40 years, and they couldn't find workers to accept the lousy wages as well.
Yeah,
so
and those people who might do it, they're busy trying to get out of the country at the same time anyway, so they're trying to get rid of all the foreign workers who are undocumented, who might have done that kind of work. But also, what about, those countries? So countries like Cambodia, for example, where the wages aren't great, but they are trying to pull themselves out of poverty. They lost US aid. They were getting some support. So we have all decided we're going to neglect developing nations and not give them any money to help them on their way. And now we're not going to buy from them. So what do? I mean, it's inhumane, isn't it? I mean, it's not very humane having people working in sweatshops, but then saying, well, okay, you're not working in a sweatshop anymore. Just try poverty because there's no work at all. I mean, what do these countries do?
Well, see, a country that's been doing it for long enough, China just basically says, well, screw you, we'll make it all for ourselves. Yeah. And China's got that capability. They're already starting to produce, chips that only AMSL could make in the past. It's not the same technology. It's a cheat code, in effect, rather than replacing AMSL's micron level technology. They're using some other. Right. I don't know what it is.
And then they've got artificial intelligence that can work with lower processing power.
So China's fine. China's already made it past. What this is doing is cutting off countries like Vietnam and Cambodia that are trying it later than China, because they won't have the technology transfer hasn't occurred. They don't have the local capitalists.
No. But there'll be a cheap source of labour for China, though.
Yeah, well, China will probably take advantage of it.
And there's the ironic thing. Who's going to win most out of this is probably going to be China. That will actually become the world's greatest economic superpower, helped along by America, who's sort of like going to be going to second place by shooting themselves in the foot, basically.
I think so, yeah. But
We'll take a break. When we come back, let's look at the formula. I mean, everyone will know it by now, I should imagine. But this is nothing at all about tariffs, is it?
I'll bring it up on screen, have a bit of fun when we get back. Okay, right.
Okay. Yeah. We'll do that when we come back on the Debunking Economics podcast. He's going to bring it up on screen, so that means obviously there is a video to this. If you're listening to the audio version, hunt out the video version of the Debunking Economics podcast. We are back in a moment. Well, we are talking about the madness of the US tariffs. Steve Keen, who was a supporter of protectionism, thinks that the world has, I might be putting words in your mouth here, but the world is so entwined now, it is impossible to pick apart. Certainly in a week, or in a few days. That's what I love as well. These are the new tariffs we are introducing, and we'll be introducing them in 4 days. Plenty of time for you to shift your whole method of production and set up a factory in the United States. I mean, that's the whole thing.
To bargain with Trump as well, which is what he's looking forward to.
Yeah, but I'm not so sure there will be too much bargaining on this. He seems like, because let's remember the intention of this is, number one, to get companies to move to America. But I don't think he's too fussed about that, is he? Because he's also seeing it as a tool of revenue. And I think he thinks that, okay, if I get revenue from the goods that are coming into the country, which are being paid by Americans, then I'm taxing the consumer, a bit like a GST really, but just on imports, maybe that's not a bad idea. And I can get rid of other tax, like income tax. I think that's his end game. I mean, he would like to get rid of income tax altogether.
I think the thing which I've taken as an angle is that his real objective is to eliminate trade deficits.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, he's trying to do it using tariffs and that crazy formula. We'll talk about the crazy formula in a moment. But the real way to eliminate trade deficits is to borrow an idea from John Maynard Keynes that was never implemented, called the Bancor.
Yeah.
Because the whole objective of the Bancor was to eliminate trade deficits as well. Keynes and Trump were as one on this argument that trade deficits are dangerous. And you have a better global economy if you minimise trade deficits. But Keynes's idea about how to get rid of it was a bit brighter than what Trump has been persuaded to try, particularly the stupid formula. And I think if Trump wants to really do it, drop the tariffs nonsense, bring in the Bancor and strong-arm people to go Bancor.
Well, he has to do something, doesn't he? Because if it is a concern, and you can tell me whether it is a big concern or not, but the idea of a growing trade deficit, if it is a big concern, they've got a problem, because it does just keep on rising. In the last year, it's risen a great deal. And so if you're keeping tabs on that, you would have cause for concern. So they have to do something. Or does it not matter?
Well, it does matter. Looking at, I read the justification as well as the formula. I read the justification that was done by the Trade Secretary, I think it was, for the formula that they used. And to me, two possibilities. Either it was some, and for once in my life I feel sorry for a neoclassical economist, some neoclassical economist forced to come up with a bullshit explanation to justify the tariff formula, which I presume Trump, at a guess, dreamt up himself or somebody in his inner circle. Or, and this is the other possibility, it may have been designed by an AI. And I've seen quite a few. Because see, one of the arguments in favour of the formula being designed by an AI is that they lump tariffs on a couple of islands that have an enormous population of penguins and nothing else. Okay? And so what they did it wasn't by country, it was by internet what do you call it, IP address. And there's IP address, .ch, I think is that Switzerland? I think it is. NL is Netherlands, and something else is an island in the South Pacific full of penguins. So, and what happened, apparently there was some transmitter that was sent down to the island, and they had to send it back because it needed repairs, and by sending it back it got classified as an export. So they got an export and an import, and the imbalance was huge. So the people who are paying the highest tariffs for America are penguins.
So fantastic. So what they did, and maybe you can show on your screen, but what they did was they've taken a country's trade deficit with America, and they divided it by the value of the imports from that country. So if we take Cambodia as an example, just because that's the one with the highest tariff, Cambodia has a trade deficit of 11.4 billion. The US imports 11.7 billion from Cambodia. So divide the deficit by the imports, and you get 96%. And then he says they're being very kind and they're going to halve that. So that's why he arrived at 49% tariff on Cambodia. But that's the simplified formula, isn't it?
That's the spin. So like this is exports to like the excise exports by country I, which in this case we can take to be Cambodia. Exports to Cambodia from Cambodia to America minus imports. Hang on, I think MI is the American imports. Okay, so that's what America imports minus what America exports to Cambodia. So the X here is really small, the MI is really big, and I don't know whether they've got a minus. I think they've got them. I'm guessing the equation's backwards. I haven't actually had a real. I've just laughed too much to take it seriously. But that's the trade deficit, and that's the import. So the ratio of the two, and then these two numbers turn up here, and it read like
in a nutshell, though, it is just that, isn't it? It's taking the trade deficit and then divide it by the value of imports.
Yeah, and the two little constants they bring in there as well. Eta is the extent to which the price elasticity. So one big thing in conventional economic thinking is what they call the elasticity of demand. Yeah. And that says how much does the quantity demanded change given a change in the price. Now, the number that they use is that a 1% fall in the price will cause a 4% rise in sales. That gives you an elasticity number of 4. That's the first number there. Then the second one
for what, though? For all the imports from that country? Or for to the American consumer?
Yeah, and that's nonsense. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a ridiculously high elasticity of demand. You don't find that
Oh,
sort of
so
thing
they
in
apply
real
that to everything, you're saying?
everything, yeah. So they say the figure is 4.
Right.
So a 1% fall in prices will cause a 4% increase in demand. That's why it's a negative. Okay, the price goes down, demand goes up. They use a 4 there, and then the next one is how much of the tariff change is passed on, and that is a 0.25.
Right.
So you multiply the 0.4 by the 0.25, you get 1. But what they did as well, and this is I'm almost certain now it's an AI that created the justification for this formula. They said we'll use 2 instead. That gives you a half. Like you have a 0.5. By 0.25 by 2, you get 2 coming out of that, or whatever. Forget it. I'm happy to make numerical mistakes here because, hey, I'm in good company. I could be president. You get the number here becomes a 2. So that's the trade deficit divided by the import level multiplied by 2. So you get half.
Right.
That's where the half came
if you're
from.
not following this, don't worry, because
it's bullshit.
Because fundamentally, it's the trade deficit divided by the value of imports. And
Basically,
I went through and I did it for about 30 countries based on published data, and I got the percentage tariff, divided by 2, and I got the percentage. So you've got all those other extraneous considerations, but they've not been considerations at all. That's why Cambodia is on 49%, Vietnam on 45%, Sri Lanka on 45%, Iraq on 39%, and so forth. So this is all. So when Donald Trump says it's all about the equalizing the tariffs, so Cambodia does have tariffs. They max out at 35%, not 49, not 97%.
97%.
So it is nothing to do with the tariffs imposed. So he lied about that. That's strange, isn't it? Is that the first time Donald Trump's lied?
Lies. No,
we should check back.
He's the most honest human being that God has ever created.
He's also the greatest, and the most honest, and the most handsome, and the healthiest. All of those things. So we should.
Hey,
but
you can do it. You can do a duet with with Trump and George Galloway coming up.
I could do George Gay. Hey, how are you doing there? Anyway, anyway, it's all been one big lie. Yeah. And it's a formula. So how do people respond to this? Because if he's saying, look, I'm applying the same, it's a like for like. He said, all we're doing is we're applying what you're applying to us, which is not the case at all. It's an imbalance. It's America's choice to buy cheap clothes from Cambodia. How does Cambodia respond? They can't say we're going to drop our tariffs because their tariffs are 35%. It doesn't apply anyway because they can't afford to buy anything from America. So how do they respond to this? How do people negotiate when the whole reason for the negotiation is false?
Yeah, I mean, I really can't answer that question. I'm just you expected something silly, but not this silly.
Yeah.
So, it's a question of how long does this last for? Because there'll now be, American corporations. The real interest is what do American companies producing in third world countries do with these cost imports that are now screwing their profitability. I've got a feeling they're going to get on the phone. That's the most effective thing. Ring Donald, right? And say this is screwing with our profitability. We're going to pull out of your pack, etc., etc. I think that'll work better than anything that any national.
But why are they not? Why have they not been doing that all the way along the line?
I think they're still in shock.
Or maybe they're in fear.
It's only a couple of days. I mean, a couple of days is a year and a half in Trump time.
But if you're his friend, then you get benefits. That's the thing.
Well, that's I think the friend's most likely calling right now about what to do. I think the only way out of this is to say, well, what are you really trying to achieve? And what he's really trying to achieve is to eliminate trade deficits. And that's a good idea. Okay, this is one area that I disagree with modern monetary theory, who are sort of pro-deficits. I'm going to come out and explain why I think that's nonsense sometime in the next few months with my online course and then publicise that. But if you look back at what Keynes said back at the time of the formation of the Bretton Woods Agreement, Keynes also was anti-trade deficits, and particularly anti-trade surpluses. In both systems, he said, when you have a trade deficit or a trade surplus, you're exporting your problems to another country. So the mechanism we need for international trade is one that should minimise trade deficits. And for that reason, amongst many others, Keynes said we should not have a national currency being used for international trade. We should make up a currency which is only used for trade, and that's called the Bancor. And then the whole idea of the Bancor was to limit trade deficits and trade surpluses. And it was a very clever scheme. It got shot down by Harry Dexter White, who was America's representative at Bretton Woods. And just to rub a bit of, I'm hoping this will work. Dexter, he was a Democrat, so that's one thing against him. But he's also accused of being a Russian spy.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a good reasons to undermine what Harry Dexter White did. So let's get Keynes's plan. We can call it the Trump call. Okay, so you bring in the Trump call.
We've talked about it. Good idea. If we put Trump's name in it, he's bound to apply. He will love it.
Trump.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to set up the international clearing union that Keynes wished to establish for the Bancor. We're going to call it the Trump. Okay, and everybody gets, hey, that's you'll come up Trumps. It works. Okay,
there we are.
Okay, so you get an account at the ICU, and it starts with 0. Nobody's got any trumps at all. And then if you run a trade surplus, you get a positive balance. You get, you're getting more trumps than other people are. You're getting more trumps from other people than they're giving to you. Your account goes into positive. Everybody else gets negative trumps. And then what the ICU does is charge interest on both the surpluses and the deficits. So countries running a balanced trade pay no interest at all to the ICU, but countries that are running either a large trade surplus or a large trade deficit, they both pay interest to the ICU, and then the ICU uses that, pays the interest to third world countries. So Cambodia gets a Guernsey.
So hang on, so I've got a trade deficit and I pay interest on the fact that I'm not getting as much money.
Yeah, the whole thing is let's get rid of them. Okay, Keynes's idea was that, particularly like the people talk about the smoot tariffs and stuff like that. Keynes understood that it was a private credit crash that caused the Great Depression, but he saw that response as adding to the problem as well. So he said we have to find a form of international trade after World War II that doesn't use a national currency. Of course, at the time he was doing that, the currency being used for international trade was the British pound. Yeah. So he wanted to eliminate that, but the Americans said, we're going to take over from you. Well, it's a poison chalice, because if your currency is being used for international trade, then people need your currency not just to buy your goods, but to buy goods from everybody else as well. That gives you an inflated demand for your currency. It overvalues it. It means your manufacturing sector can't compete. And guess what? You end up with a trade deficit. So the way to reverse it is for Trump to outdo Keynes and actually bring in the Bancor, but let's call it a Trump just to make it work.
Yeah, I wonder whether it would apply everywhere, because there will be countries that are too small that they're never going to get a balance of trade that's zero. But anyway, I think we need to visit that in another podcast.
Let's have an episode on it,
because we can talk about that. And we could talk about the amount of currency in circulation for each country as well, and how that interplays. Yeah. But look, the McKinley tariff, you're familiar with that in 1890. So McKinley was the president. Yeah. He introduced tariffs at 50%. Again, he was a Republican. There was a panic in 1893. There was an 8-month depression, but it actually sort of like the repercussions were felt for a lot longer than that. It was the worst recession that America had had up to the Great Depression.
No, that's not true. 1837 is worth the panic of 1837. But we'll cover that one later.
Oh, right, okay. Well, there was a panic in 1893 as well. And it was fairly short-lived. I mean, the Democrats came in swept to a majority and got rid of all of those tariffs. So I wonder whether we're going to. So it's been tried. And that was in the olden days, before we had this more, entwined trade operations.
And in the 19th century, Michael Hudson's PhD thesis is called America's Protectionist Takeoff. And when you look at what happened in the 19th century, tariffs were used to force local manufacturers to give them an opportunity, but also force them to produce goods which were previously imported from Europe. And a large part of America's industrialization occurred behind those tariff walls, as applied for China, as applied for Japan, Korea, etc., etc. And Danny Roderick's done, as I said once before, the very good work here establishing that. But that was in a world which wasn't globalized. So now, 2025 is setting up to be far too interesting for my liking.
Yeah, and look, his argument has to be used back against him, doesn't he? Because he is saying that everybody is ripping off America. It's disgusting. It's disgusting what they're doing. What Europe is doing to us is disgusting, he said, because Europe is not buying as much from America as it's sending to America in goods. But it's disgusting what America is doing to the rest of the world in services, which he, manages to conveniently avoid. If you were to apply that same formula that trade deficit, take the trade deficit, divide it by the value of the imports, and apply that to the services sector, to the tech sector. That would be an interesting calculation.
America be having be putting a tariff up against itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And stranger things have happened.
And then there are sectors as well, just before we go, that will always be protected. So he talks about American farmers. And it's not just a question of value or tariffs. Well, it's not at all tariffs, as we now know from this calculation. But it's also standards as well. So there are standards that apply in Europe, which was stop American cattle. I mean, disease was part of it, but also, but generally, I mean, people say, well, in Europe, you just got to get used to chlorinated chicken. What's wrong with it? But we don't want
delicious.
it. So that extra flavour, and it's clean, and it improves your teeth.
You don't clean your teeth after the
This is why
chlorine
Americans have such good teeth, isn't it? It's the chlorinated.
It is true. Yeah,
or it's
they've got great
fluoride rather
teeth.
than chlorine.
Lousy guts, but great teeth. Yeah.
Exactly, and it might not be good for the brain either, given who they voted
What's
for.
that?
Yeah, you don't need it. So, but we're not. So there's irrespective of what he does, it's going to be a lot for Europe to start taking produce from farmers in America. But also, I mean, it's so cheap. There's the example. They are the cheap producers. Just like Cambodia is producing the cheap clothes, they are producing the cheap agricultural goods. That if we accepted that into Europe and the UK and into Australia, it would just flood the market and destroy the domestic industry. And that has to be protected because, food security is the thing.
And that's what's going to me. That's what's going to be the ultimate dominant issue for the next decade. It's going to be food security.
Yeah.
And then don't let anything destroy your food security in terms of trade wars and tariff wars and competitive advantage and so on.
It's not
You've
the thing.
got to produce your own food.
Yeah, it's not the thing to give away, is it? All right. Well, we'll see how it unfolds. I suspect the McKinley example from 1890 might be repeated, but it might not take 4 years. I mean, midterms.
Maybe 4 days, the way things work in
Exactly.
Trump time.
Exactly. All right. Very good to talk again, Steve. We'll catch you next time.
Okay, mate. See you then. Bye.